single game.
It scores! Like Lazarus, the Avalanche have come back!
There's going to be a new season starting come game one. When you have an opportunity on a team like this, you feel it.
The 2021-2022 season was do or die for the Colorado Avalanche. They had made some moves to fill in the holes around the roster they had lost in the offseason. Darcy Kuemper would now be taking the main role in the net. He would be responsible for being the main piece the Avs would need to push over the top. Other than that, the majority of their core returned. Not to mention they were finally getting Erik Johnson back healthy, so now that would add a big boost to the defense. Expectations were higher than ever before. The team is no longer in the nice little blissful bubble of what they could become. Everyone knew what the Avalanche were capable of. Now it was about what they were truly made of. Was this team a cup contender? Or just another playoff team that would never reach anything higher? This year was do or die for them as they had a lot of key pieces set to hit the free agent market. It was now or never for this group. The season wasn't exactly a perfect start. Through the first month, they were 4-5-1. Inconsistencies looked to be plaguing the roster. Defensively, the Avalanche were still going through a lot of injuries and finding their own identity. Guys like Nathan MacKinnon, Gabriel Landeskog, Cale Makar, Mikko Rantanen, and even Darcy Kuemper for a bit missed significant time. The Avalanche also couldn't find consistency in the net with Kuemper when he was in there. He struggled to initially adapt to the Avalanche system. Many were questioning whether or not Darcy Kuemper was truly what the Avalanche would need to go to the Cup. His inconsistencies also had many wondering if he was truly worth what the Avalanche had paid to trade for him. At one point, the Avalanche's goaltending tandem was down to Justus Sanonen, who was a highly touted prospect who had just come over into North America for the first time, and Jonas Johansson, who they had traded for the season prior from Buffalo. Through November, they started to round into form, but they showed severe flaws, especially defensively. And then it all culminated with an 8-3 blowout at the hands of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Many were wondering if Colorado could truly live up to the lofty expectations that had been set for them. Thankfully, once December rolled around, the Avalanche finally caught fire. They weren't a perfect team, but they were starting to show the consistency they had lacked to start the year. Defensively, they were finally operating as a machine, doing a good job of collecting the rebounds and keeping the net clean in front of the goaltender. Cale Makar was on a torrid pace, putting up historic numbers and becoming the new engine that the Avalanche needed. Once Nathan MacKinnon was finally healthy, the forward core was clicking again. Valeri Nichushkin, who once went an entire season without scoring a goal, had developed into a prominent sniper in the Avalanche's offense. He was a fantastic finisher, and he brought just what Colorado needed in terms of depth scoring. Nazem Kadri had a career season, with a career-high 87 points. He provided the center leadership and depth that Colorado needed when MacKinnon was injured. Landeskog and Rantanen were clicking. The team was firing on all fumes going into January. But it happened again. Another COVID pause. Several teams had been hit with lots of COVID breakouts and the season would be forced to pause for 3 weeks. They wouldn't pick up until the second week of January. This would also result in another huge cancellation: the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. Not that the games themselves would be cancelled, but the NHL would no longer allow players to travel to them. The NHL had originally planned to pause in a few weeks for February to allow its players to travel to Beijing to compete in the Olympics. But then it was confirmed that there would be a mandatory 5-week COVID period for teams to get tested and then quarantine their players. The NHL was not going to let this happen, so they refused to go to Beijing. They would use those few weeks in February to make up the time they'd lost at the end of December. This was so the NHL could finally get in a full 82-game season and finish the year by April. Even though those 3 weeks were long for the Avalanche, they finally used them to get healthy. They were determined by the time the season returned to have a full fleshed-out unit. Once they did, they were the hottest team in the league, scoring at will. They were racking up 7-goal games like it was nothing. The defense was shutting down opponents with complete precision. And then, just to complete the puzzle, Darcy Kuemper finally rounded into form. Darcy Kuemper showed that he was worth what the Avs traded for him. Francouz had finally returned and was the perfect backstop. The Avalanche had their tandem they needed to go deep into the playoffs. And they weren't just winning tight contests, they were convincingly dominating teams. Teams like Florida, Tampa, Boston, Toronto. The Avs were coming back and then dominating games the next. It was determined that the Avalanche were finally turning into the contender that people expected them to be. The Avalanche are finally showing the form that people had expected of them. This was the team that people thought would be a Stanley Cup contender. This looked like a team that would finally break the 21-year drought. But the Avalanche still needed more. Just a few more pieces to round out their machine for the deep playoff than they desired. Joe Sakic got to work. For defense, he added more veteran depth than Josh Manson's. He added another veteran with a lot of playoff experience in Andrew Cogliano. He would be nice grit for the bottom six. But they wanted a legitimate sniper. Another one to pair with Valeri Nichushkin in the second line. With that, they found an underrated commodity. Arturi Lehkonen. Lehkonen had scored the goal that sent Montreal to the Stanley Cup final the year prior against Vegas. And he had proven to be a decent scoring option. He was also a nice little defensive forward, so he could play two ways. Even though they had to pay one of their top prospects and a first-round pick to get him, the Avalanche felt it was worth it. The goal was clear. Colorado was preparing for May and June. Veterans with playoff experience to add to the young core of talented players. The goaltending was finally hitting peak form. Darcy Kuemper at some point looked like a Vezina-caliber player. Jared Bednar had finally gotten his team firing on all cylinders. With a couple weeks to go in the season, the Avalanche clinched the Central Division. They set a franchise-high record of points, 119 points. They also set a franchise-high 56 wins in a season. The Avalanche were the best team in hockey, at least in terms of the regular season. They still had to prove themselves in the playoffs. They wouldn't win the President's Trophy as they were beaten out by the Panthers by a single point. But the Avalanche for the last week of the season took it easy. They didn't seem to be playing with the same fire. They had already secured the number 1 seed in the Western Conference and they'd won home ice through the playoffs. Now they knew what they really wanted. The Cup. And it was all laid out in front of them. It would be 2 months of some of the most grueling stretches of hockey ever played. All the Avalanche needed was 16 wins to accomplish their mission. It had been their goal for 5 years now. And it had been a long time coming. All Colorado needed was 2 months of their best hockey. Anyone had a shot in the next 2 months. Playoff hockey is volatile, and it will demand the best of any team who dares to set foot into it. The regular season goal had been accomplished. Colorado flexed their might and showed what they were capable of. Now, it was time for everything to come together. The Stanley Cup playoff.